Most canine dogs follow orders. This one didn't. Bandit, a 4-year-old German Shepherd, refused to leave an old train car deep in the forest. He barked, he howled, he clawed until his paws bled, and what his handler found inside that rusted metal coffin would silence an entire town and leave the nation stunned. The morning mist still clung to the pine trees when Officer Sawyer Reed parked his cruiser at the edge of Ironwood Trail, a seldom-used path leading into the dense Oregon woods. The radio call had been vague, local disturbance, strange animal sounds, but enough to warrant a look. Besides, his partner, Bandit, had been restless all night. Maybe the dog sensed something. Bandit sat upright in the back seat, ears perked, tail flicking with agitation. He wasn't barking yet, but Sawyer could tell his canine partner was locked onto something. "All right, let's check it out," Sawyer muttered, stepping out and opening the rear door. Bandit leapt out like a spring, nose to the ground instantly. He didn't hesitate or wait for command. He shot into the trees, following a scent line only he could perceive. Sawyer jogged behind, boots crunching over fallen pine needles and moss. They ran for almost 3 minutes before Bandit came to a dead stop. There it was. A rusted freight train sat crooked and sun-bleached on tracks that hadn't been touched in decades. Ivy curled around the wheels. Paint flaked off in strips like peeling skin. The forest had nearly reclaimed it. Bandit was already at the third car, circling it, growling low. Then came the bark, a deep, ferocious sound that echoed between the trees like a war drum. Sawyer slowed. "Easy, boy, what is it?" But Bandit wouldn't stop. He was pawing at the side of the car like a wolf at a trap door. Barking, whining, backing up, then charging again. Sawyer approached cautiously. "There's no way anyone's in there," he said aloud, mostly to himself. The train had no power. The cars were sealed. No reports of squatters or missing persons in this area for weeks. It was just a dead husk in the woods. And yet, Bandit was losing his mind. Sawyer rapped his knuckles against the car's side. A hollow metallic clang answered. He pressed his ear to the rusted metal. Silence. Then a sound. Clink. Soft, subtle, like something shifted. Or someone. He stepped back, heart quickening. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reed. I need backup at the Ironwood Trailhead. Possible entrapment in an abandoned train car. Send cutting equipment and medics. Repeat, medics. Unknown number inside." Bandit continued barking like his soul depended on it. 15 minutes later, a second cruiser arrived, then a fire truck. A young paramedic hopped out, surprised. "You really think someone's in there?" Sawyer didn't take his eyes off Bandit. He's never wrong. The train had no visible door handles, no way in or out. The only opening was a welded seam along the side that looked newer than the rest of the car. Someone had sealed it, recently. The cutting torch team arrived and got to work, sparks flying as they sliced into steel older than the Vietnam War. The smell of burnt metal filled the air. Bandit backed off a few paces but stayed alert, eyes locked on the door like a soldier at post. An old man with a fishing hat wandered up from the trail. "That thing's been sitting there since before I was born. Ain't no one been near it for years," he said. Sawyer didn't answer. He was watching the dog. The door gave way with a screech. The interior was pitch black, even in daylight. A damp, musty odor seeped out, like moldy fabric and old food. One of the firemen leaned in with a flashlight. "Looks empty." Bandit surged forward, barking furiously. He leapt inside before anyone could stop him. "Bandit!" Sawyer called. A low growl came from inside, then a whimper, then barking again, this time more frenzied. Sawyer pulled his own flashlight and followed. The air inside was thick. Dust danced in the beam of light. Wooden crates lined the walls, stacked like a storage unit. Bandit was clawing at the floor. Sawyer knelt beside him. "What do you see?" A panel, metal loose and oddly shaped. Sawyer gripped it and yanked. The panel groaned, then popped open. A square hole, about 3 feet wide. A ladder descended into darkness. He heard it again. Whimpering, Sawyer froze. "I need lights, now." A floodlight was brought in. Sawyer descended slowly, Bandit at his heels. Beneath the train car was a room. Not a mechanical crawl space or a utility hatch. A room about 20 by 20 feet. Makeshift mattresses lined the walls. Food wrappers, water bottles, coloring books, stuffed animals, and silence. Then, a soft shuffle, and from the farthest corner, a tiny voice. "Are you here to hurt us too?" Sawyer's breath caught. A girl stepped forward, maybe 10 years old, clutching a much younger boy's hand. Her face was pale, eyes sunken but alert. She wore a mismatched shirt and shorts, dirtied and torn. Behind her, movement. More shapes, more children. 15 in total, some hiding behind crates. Others pressed against the walls, scared to speak. Some cried silently. One held a broken action figure, another sucked their thumb. No adults, no captors, just children. Bandit stood in the center, tail still, watching them. He didn't bark anymore. He didn't have to. Sawyer crouched in the cramped underground space, his heart thundering in his chest like a war drum. The air was heavy and damp, thick with a smell he couldn't quite place. Not just mildew or sweat. It was fear, a fear that had seeped into the walls. The flashlight in his hand flickered slightly as it swept across the faces of the children hiding in the shadows. 15 of them, none older than 12. The youngest looked barely 3. Their faces were pale, cheeks hollow, eyes too tired for their age. Some trembled, others stared blankly, still others clung to one another like lifelines in a storm. And in the center of it all stood Bandit. The canine had gone completely still, his ears tilted slightly back, his tail low but steady. He wasn't barking anymore. His job was done. He had found them. But what now? Sawyer swallowed hard and pressed the mic on his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Officer Reed. We have multiple juveniles recovered alive. Repeat, alive from beneath the train car. I need EMTs, trauma units, and child services at Ironwood Trail ASAP. There was a long pause before the radio crackled back. Copy that. Did you say juveniles? How many? Sawyer took a deep breath. 15. Looks like all of them are under 12. Another long pause. 10-4. Units are en route. He clipped the mic back and turned his attention to the girl standing closest to him, the one who had spoken earlier. She was small, her frame too thin for her age, with tangled brown hair falling into her eyes. Her lips were cracked. She held the hand of a little boy in a Superman t-shirt who stared at Sawyer like he was made of glass. What's your name, sweetheart? Sawyer asked gently. The girl hesitated. Emily. Okay, Emily, I'm Officer Reed, and that's my partner, Bandit. You're safe now, all right? Emily looked past him toward the ladder leading up to the main car. Her eyes darted between the opening and the flashlight beam. Is he gone? Sawyer froze. Who? She didn't answer. Instead, she took a step backward, drawing the little boy with her. Behind them, more children emerged, slowly, one by one. They looked like frightened deer. No one cried, no one screamed. They moved like they'd been trained to stay silent. Sawyer felt his stomach twist. Whoever had kept these children here had taught them to be invisible. When the first paramedics arrived, they were stunned into silence. One medic dropped her bag when she saw the children being lifted out of the train like ghosts from a grave. She covered her mouth with her glove and whispered, "Oh my God." It took almost an hour to extract everyone safely. Bandit stayed inside the car the whole time, refusing to leave until the last child was carried out. The final one was a boy with a homemade eye patch and a bruised cheekbone. He clung to Bandit's neck until Sawyer pried him away gently. Once outside, the forest clearing turned into a makeshift triage zone. Blankets, IVs, energy bars, juice boxes. Medical teams scrambled to assess each child while local officers began taking statements. Drones buzzed overhead as news choppers circled the area. By sunset, the entire town of Elk Haven knew what had happened. But no one knew why. That's what gnawed at Sawyer the most. He leaned against the hood of his cruiser, watching Bandit rest beside his water bowl. The dog was exhausted, physically and emotionally. Sawyer had worked with K9s for nearly a decade, but this was different. Bandit had found missing kids before, but never like this. Never buried, never hidden away like some dirty secret. Sheriff Dale Huxley approached, jaw clenched, eyes stormy. You all right? Sawyer nodded slowly. Yeah. You and the mutt just cracked open the biggest case this county's ever seen. Sawyer looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Something's wrong, Sheriff. None of the kids said anything about where they're from. No last names, no cries for their parents, no begging to call home. They're probably in shock. Maybe, but it felt rehearsed. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. You think someone coached them? Sawyer didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the back of the ambulance where Emily sat under a foil blanket, sipping a juice box like a ghost of a normal kid. He knelt beside her. Emily, he said softly, I know you're scared, but I need your help. She didn't respond. Do you remember how you got there, to the train? Her fingers tightened around the juice box. Her lips pressed into a flat line. Sawyer tried again. Were you alone or did someone bring you? Emily's eyes drifted to Bandit, who lay a few feet away. Then she whispered, "He said no one would find us, that even if they looked, they wouldn't listen to dogs." Sawyer blinked. Who said that? But Emily just shook her head. A few moments later, she asked something that sent a chill through his spine. "Is it Friday yet?" Sawyer frowned. "No, why?" Emily looked at him with hollow eyes. "Because Friday is when the next train comes." Back at the station, Sawyer pulled the train's registry files. The car's ID numbers had been filed as decommissioned for over 15 years. No movement, no transfer, no scheduled hauls. The system showed it as abandoned. But someone had kept it sealed. Someone had welded the door shut from the outside. Someone had added the trap door in the room beneath. The worst part? The modifications were done recently within the last 6 months. Whoever had been using the train was organized. And they weren't done. Bandit sat beside his handler on the porch that night, a cool breeze blowing through the trees behind the station. He looked up at Sawyer with tired but alert eyes. "You knew," Sawyer murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You knew before any of us." Bandit leaned into the touch. A hero with no badge, just instinct, and a howl that wouldn't be ignored. Sawyer sat at his desk long after the others had gone home, the glow of the desk lamp casting a tired halo across stacks of reports and coffee-stained notepads. The station had been buzzing all afternoon with state investigators, child services, and reporters clawing for details. But by midnight, it was eerily quiet. Too quiet. He flipped through the statements again. Most of the kids barely said a word. The younger ones clung to stuffed animals the medics had given them, their eyes darting at every sound. The older ones stayed silent, their stares heavy with secrets. Every time someone pressed them for answers, they shut down. 15 children, hidden in a train car that shouldn't even exist. And one haunting phrase from Emily: "Friday is when the next train comes." Sawyer rubbed his temples. Friday was only 4 days away. Bandit lay stretched across the floor by his boots, breathing steady but ears twitching at every creak of the old building. Sawyer knew the dog wasn't really asleep. He never fully rested after a big find. His instincts were like coiled springs, ready, waiting. "You don't trust it either, do you?" Sawyer muttered, glancing down. Bandit opened one eye, just one, as if to say, "Of course not." By morning, the sheriff had ordered surveillance set up at the tracks. Motion-activated cameras, trail sensors, unmarked units stationed a mile out. The abandoned line stretched through forests, farmland, and the outer edge of Elk Haven. For years, folks had used it for hunting or the occasional midnight party, but now it had turned into a crime scene. Sawyer walked the length of the train again with a forensic team. The rusted shell looked the same on the outside, but inside, the modified compartment told a different story. The metal cuts were too clean, the welding too recent. Whoever did it had resources, skill, money. He crouched beside the hidden trapdoor. The steel plate had scrape marks, fresh ones, not from police tools, from use. "Somebody opened and closed this a lot," he murmured. A young detective beside him asked, "Why keep kids down here? Why not move them sooner?" Sawyer didn't answer. His mind went back to the etching they'd found scratched into the wall with a nail. Batch 2. His stomach tightened. This wasn't a hideout, it was a holding pen. That afternoon, Sawyer visited the children again. They'd been transferred to a local safe house under protective custody. Colorful murals of cartoon animals brightened the walls, and social workers tried their best to coax laughter with toys and crayons. But the room still felt heavy, the air thick with trauma. Emily sat by the window, sketching something on a notepad. Sawyer pulled up a chair. Bandit patted in beside him, tail wagging softly. "What are you drawing?" Sawyer asked. Emily covered the page quickly, eyes wary. "Hey, it's all right," he said gently. "You don't have to show me if you don't want to. But maybe Bandit would like to see." Bandit tilted his head, tongue lolling slightly. For the first time, Emily cracked a tiny smile. She turned the notebook slowly. It was a picture of a train, not the abandoned car, but something newer, sleeker. Beside it, stick figures of children stood in neat lines. Above them was a dark shape, like a shadowed figure, towering over them. "Is this the train you were in?" Sawyer asked softly. Emily shook her head. "That one's coming." Sawyer leaned closer. "Where's it coming from?" Her pencil hovered above the page. Then she drew a circle with 4 lines branching off, like roads. At the center, she wrote one word in blocky letters: Depot. Sawyer brought the drawing straight to Sheriff Huxley. The sheriff studied it, chewing on the end of his pen. "A depot, huh? Could be anywhere." "Not just anywhere," Sawyer countered. Look at the lines, 4 of them. Only one place around here matches. Old Redwood Frigate Yard, decommissioned 10 years ago. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. You really think some trafficker's running trains through Redwood? That yard's half collapsed. Then why would Emily know it? She's 10, Sheriff. She didn't dream this up. Huxley set the paper down, his expression hardening. All right, we'll check it out. But quiet. No leaks to the press. 2 nights later, Sawyer found himself crouched in the overgrown brush just outside Redwood Yard. Bandit pressed against his leg. The moon was thin, barely a sliver, but the place loomed like a skeleton in the dark. Rusted towers, half-broken signals, weeds taller than a man. 3 unmarked SUVs were parked down the road, waiting for his signal. Bandit's ears twitched, his body stiffened. Sawyer whispered into his mic, "He's got something." They moved forward carefully, weaving between weeds and steel beams. The wind carried the faintest sound, metal wheels grinding faintly on rails. Sawyer froze. "You hear that?" One of the deputies nodded. "Train." But no train should have been on those tracks. The line was dead. The noise grew louder, unmistakable now. Headlights cut through the fog. A locomotive, newer than anything that belonged on a forgotten yard, rolled slowly into view. 2 cars, both sealed, painted matte black. It stopped at the far end of the yard, engines idling. Sawyer's heart pounded. He felt Bandit bristle, a low growl forming in his throat. From the shadows, figures emerged. Men in dark clothing, moving with precision. They carried flashlights, clipboards, radios. Not kids sneaking around, professionals. Sawyer whispered, "What the hell is this?" The sheriff's voice came through the radio. "Hold position. We need to see where they're going." But Bandit wouldn't hold. His growl deepened into a bark, sharp and insistent. Sawyer gripped his collar, trying to quiet him, but the dog lunged forward, pulling hard. The men turned. Flashlights swept the yard. "Damn it," Sawyer hissed. The element of surprise was gone. Chaos erupted. Shouts rang out. Engines revved. The men scrambled back toward the train, radios crackling in codes Sawyer couldn't understand. One of them lifted a gun. Shots split the night, bullets sparking against steel beams. "Move in!" Sheriff Huxley's order cut through the noise. Officers poured into the yard, weapons drawn, sirens blaring in the distance. The black train roared to life, wheels screeching as it lurched forward. Sawyer sprinted after it, Bandit at his side, the air filled with smoke and panic. He leapt over debris, chasing the shrinking beam of the locomotive's light. But the train was faster, too fast. It vanished into the fog, leaving behind only echoes and the reek of diesel. Sawyer doubled over, gasping, fury boiling in his chest. Bandit stood beside him, barking into the distance, as if daring the night to give the train back. Back at the command post, officers compared notes. Several of the men had escaped, disappearing into the woods. No one was captured. But evidence was left behind. Inside the yard, near where the black train had stopped, they found a crate. It was half open, filled with children's clothes, small shirts, tiny sneakers, a pink backpack with unicorn stickers. Sawyer stared at it for a long time, his hands curled into fists. They were moving kids again. Somewhere. And the abandoned train car full of 15 children had only been one piece of something much larger. Bandit lay at his feet, still restless, eyes fixed on the horizon. Sawyer reached down, scratching his partner's head. "We're not done, boy. Not even close." Sawyer barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the grinding wheels of that black train echoing in his skull. It wasn't just a sound, it was a promise. Proof that someone was still moving children through forgotten tracks like cattle in the dead of night. And it had slipped right through their fingers. By dawn, the sheriff's office was already under siege from reporters. The story of the 15 rescued children had gone national overnight. News vans lined the main street, anchors shouting into cameras, broadcasting to millions. But Sawyer knew the truth. What they had found in that abandoned car was only the beginning. Bandit sat in the corner of the squad room, head resting on his paws, eyes open and alert. The German shepherd hadn't settled since the night before. He paced in his sleep, growled at shadows, and perked up at every car that rumbled past the station. "He knows we lost something," Sawyer muttered, sipping burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup. His partner wasn't just a dog. He was a barometer for the unseen, and right now, the needle was pointing toward danger. Sheriff Huxley slammed a file down on Sawyer's desk. His face was red from lack of sleep and frustration. "The feds are involved now," the sheriff said flatly. "They're sending a joint task force. FBI, DHS, even some suits from DC. They want everything we've got. Sawyer leaned back. Good, maybe they'll actually catch the bastards. Huxley shook his head. Or maybe they'll bury it. You think the government wants the world to know kids are being trafficked on ghost trains through our backyards? The words hung heavy. Sawyer didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out the sketch Emily had drawn, the crude drawing of the depot with 4 tracks leading into it. Redwood Yard, she'd known about it. She'd warned them about Friday. And she was right. The black train had come and gone. Now they had to figure out where it went. By noon, Sawyer and Bandit were back in the field. They followed the abandoned line past the Redwood Yard, tracing it mile by mile. Most of it was choked with weeds and half-collapsed bridges, but sections had been cleared. Recently. Fresh tire tracks ran alongside the rails. Tools had been left behind. Someone had been working hard to make a dead line look alive again. Sawyer crouched low, running his fingers across the dirt. They're not just moving kids through here, they're restoring the whole line. Bandit sniffed a patch of earth and barked once, sharp and deliberate. His hackles rose. What do you got, boy? The dog pulled toward a cluster of brush near the tree line. Sawyer pushed through, branches snapping against his uniform. On the other side was a small clearing with a burn pit. Ash still smoldered faintly. Scattered among the remains were scraps of fabric, melted plastic, and the twisted skeleton of what looked like a child's lunchbox. Sawyer's throat tightened. Someone had been destroying evidence. He radioed it in, marking the location for forensics. But in his gut, he knew they'd find little. Whoever ran this operation was careful, ruthless. That evening, Sawyer returned to the safe house. The children had been split into smaller groups for security, but Emily was still there. She sat cross-legged on the floor with a coloring book, crayons scattered around her. She wasn't coloring, though. She was drawing trains again. This time, the picture showed not 1, but 3 black cars. And in the corner, a shape that looked like a warehouse with high fences around it. Sawyer knelt beside her. Emily, can you tell me what this is? She kept coloring, her voice barely a whisper. It's where they stop, where they tell us to be quiet. Sawyer's pulse quickened. Where is it? Emily shrugged. Don't know, but it's far. Took all night. He studied the picture. The warehouse had big black towers at each corner. Guard towers. Who told you to be quiet? He pressed gently. She froze. Then her hand tightened on the crayon until it snapped. She dropped it and looked away. Sawyer didn't push further. Trauma wasn't a door you could kick open. But he knew one thing. Somewhere out there, hidden in plain sight, was a compound tied to that train. And Emily had just drawn the first map. 2 days later, the task force rolled into Elk Haven. Black SUVs, suits, satellite trucks, all the federal theater Sawyer had expected. Special Agent Marcus Vance introduced himself with a stiff handshake and a hollow smile. He was tall, sharp-featured, with eyes that scanned everything and revealed nothing. We appreciate your cooperation, Officer Reed, Vance said. From here on, this investigation falls under federal jurisdiction. Sawyer bristled. With all due respect, Agent, my dog found those kids. My team was here first. We're not stepping aside. Vance's smile didn't falter. Of course, we'll need your continued assistance. But understand, this goes far beyond Elk Haven. Whoever is running these trains isn't just a local problem. They're part of something bigger. Sawyer exchanged a look with Sheriff Huxley, who muttered under his breath, "That's what I'm afraid of." The following night, Sawyer couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. He and Bandit drove the rural back roads near the yard, scanning for movement. That's when Bandit's ears shot up. He growled low, pressing against the window. Sawyer slowed the cruiser. "What is it, boy?" The dog's nose pointed toward a cluster of storage sheds along the tree line. They looked abandoned, tin roofs, boarded windows. But Bandit's reaction said otherwise. Sawyer killed the lights and got out, flashlight in one hand, his other resting near his holster. Bandit leapt out, silent but tense. They approached slowly. The sheds smelled faintly of diesel and bleach. Sawyer pulled the door handle, locked. Bandit began barking furiously, pawing at the base. His whole body shook with urgency. Sawyer swung his flashlight beam across the dirt. That's when he saw it. Drag marks leading from the tracks to the shed. Small ones. Children. He yanked the door hard. The lock snapped under pressure. The beam of light cut through the darkness inside. Empty. No kids, no men, just crates. Sawyer pried one open. Inside were stacks of bottled water, canned food, blankets, supplies. It wasn't a hiding place. It was a staging ground. The next morning, Sawyer stood over the open crate back at headquarters. his gut twisting. They were moving kids in shifts, storing supplies along the road. This wasn't a sloppy local crew. This was infrastructure, logistics, a pipeline. And it was running right through his county. Bandit sat beside the crate, ears flicking, as if he could hear the echo of the trains in the distance. Sawyer crouched, locking eyes with his partner. You found them once. You'll find them again. We're not letting them disappear. Not this time. Bandit's tail thumped once against the floor. For the first time in days, Sawyer allowed himself a small, fleeting smile. Because if there was one thing he trusted more than his own instincts, it was Bandit's. And right now, the dog wasn't done barking. The storage sheds had been cleared out before Sawyer and Bandit got there, but the crates of food and water left behind told him everything he needed to know. Whoever was running this operation wasn't sloppy. They were organized, disciplined. The sheds weren't a destination. They were stepping stones. And stepping stones always led somewhere. 2 days later, a briefing room at the county sheriff's office buzzed with agents, deputies, and state troopers. Maps stretched across the walls, red pins marking rail lines, abandoned yards, and reported sightings of the black train. Special Agent Marcus Vance stood at the front, arms crossed, posture like a man who didn't like being questioned. He gestured at the map. Based on intel from the yard and the supplies recovered at the sheds, we believe the train is moving in a fixed pattern, he said. It's not random. It stops at predetermined sites for refueling and resupply. Sawyer leaned forward from the back row. What about the kids? Where are they taking them? Vance's jaw tightened. That's what we're trying to determine. Trying isn't good enough, Sawyer shot back. They'll move again. You know it, I know it, and when they do, there'll be more kids packed into those cars. The room went quiet. Bandit, sitting at Sawyer's feet, let out a low growl, almost as if echoing his handler's anger. Vance finally exhaled. We've identified one possible location, a compound 30 miles south, tucked away near the Cascade foothills. Satellite imagery shows large warehouse, high fencing, and unusual activity at night. It matches the description one of the rescued children gave. Sawyer's stomach clenched. Emily's drawing, the warehouse with the towers. She hadn't just been sketching nightmares, she'd been remembering. That night, Sawyer sat on the porch of his small house, the hum of crickets filling the silence. Bandit lay beside him, chin resting on his paws. The stars overhead glittered, indifferent to the chaos below. Sawyer scratched the dog's ear. We're close, buddy. I can feel it. Bandit's tail tapped once against the wooden boards. Sawyer's phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Huxley. Wheels up at dawn, compound raid, be ready. The convoy rolled out at first light. Black SUVs, armored vans, a mobile command unit, dozens of boots on the ground. Sawyer rode shotgun in one of the lead vehicles, Bandit in the back, pacing in the confined space, restless. They arrived at the foothills by mid-morning. The compound loomed ahead, half hidden by tall pines. It was bigger than Sawyer had imagined, in 3 warehouse-sized buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing, topped with razor wire. Guard towers stood at each corner, just like Emily had drawn. The agents fanned out, setting up perimeter positions. Drones buzzed overhead, relaying live video to screens in the command unit. Movement inside, a tech called out. Multiple heat signatures, hard to say how many. Sawyer's chest tightened. Kids? Guards? Both? Agent Vance raised a fist. Teams 1 and 2, breach on my signal. Team 3, hold the perimeter. No one in, no one out. Sawyer clipped Bandit his vest into place, the bright white letters K9 visible across his side. The dog's body tensed like a coiled spring. You ready? Sawyer whispered. Bandit's eyes locked on his handler, unwavering. Then the signal came. The breach exploded into chaos, gates blown open, flashbangs cracking, shouts piercing the morning air. Officers stormed the compound in waves, rifles raised, voices commanding compliance. Sawyer and Bandit were among the first through the gate. The dog pulled hard, nose leading them toward the nearest warehouse. The heavy steel doors resisted for a moment before officers forced them open. The air inside was suffocating. The stench of sweat, mildew, and stale food hit like a wall. The beam of Sawyer's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing rows of crude wooden bunks lining the walls. Blankets scattered, plastic cups, shoes, and drawings. Children's drawings taped to the walls. Sawyer's throat closed. Bandit barked sharply, pulling toward a door at the back. Sawyer rushed forward, boot kicking it open. A smaller room, empty, except for restraints bolted into the floor and a pile of toys in the corner. One of the deputies cursed. Son of a... They were here, Sawyer muttered. Not long ago. Gunfire cracked from across the yard. Shouts erupted. Sawyer sprinted outside, Bandit at his side. Smoke curled from the far warehouse. Officers engaged with armed men in tactical gear, far more organized than local gangs. These weren't amateurs. Sawyer dove behind a concrete barrier as bullets pinged off the metal siding. Bandit stayed low, waiting for a command. Sawyer peered around the edge and spotted a figure slipping toward a smaller outbuilding at the far corner of the compound. He wasn't running with the others. He moved with purpose, guarding something. Come on, Sawyer muttered. He signaled Bandit and they broke from cover, weaving through chaos. The outbuilding door slammed shut just as they approached. Sawyer raised his boot and kicked. The frame splintered. Inside, the room was dark, lined with shelves of crates. Bandit's nose worked overtime, growling, then barking toward a stack in the corner. Sawyer shoved the crates aside. Behind them was a trapdoor, just like the one in the train car. He pulled it open. A ladder led down into blackness. From below came a faint sound. Crying, Sawyer's chest tightened. Kids. He started down the ladder, Bandit following without hesitation. The basement room mirrored the one beneath the train. Low ceilings, concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. And in the corner, huddled together like frightened sparrows, were half a dozen children. Sawyer froze, heart in his throat. One little boy shielded the others with his arms. A girl no older than 8 clutched a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with terror. It's okay, Sawyer said gently, lowering his weapon. You're safe now. We're police. The kids didn't move. Bandit stepped forward, lowering himself to the ground, tail wagging slowly. He crawled closer, ears back, eyes soft. The youngest child, the girl with the rabbit, hesitated. Then she reached out with a trembling hand and touched Bandit's fur. The dog licked her fingers gently. The dam broke. The kids began sobbing, clutching Bandit like he was their lifeline. Sawyer swallowed hard. You're safe, he repeated. We've got you. By the time they brought the children out, the compound was nearly secure. Dozens of officers moved through the warehouses, cuffing the men who hadn't escaped. But as Sawyer looked around, he realized the scope was larger than he'd feared. The first building had held bunks for at least 50, the second supply caches that could last months. And this hidden basement? Only a fraction of the victims. The black train was just one piece of the puzzle. Sheriff Huxley stood beside him, jaw set, eyes grim. They were running an entire network here. God knows how many more places there are. Sawyer looked down at Bandit, who sat proudly beside the rescued kids, tail sweeping the dirt like a metronome. We'll find them, Sawyer said quietly. Every last one. That night, the rescued children were transported to medical facilities under armed escort. News of the raid lit up every major network. K-9 unit helps rescue children from trafficking compound and Cascade foothills. But Sawyer couldn't celebrate, not yet, because deep down, he knew they hadn't stopped the operation. They just cut off one branch. And somewhere out there, the black train was still running. The Cascade foothills raid had made national headlines, but Sawyer couldn't shake the gnawing unease in his chest. They'd saved 6 more children from the basement beneath the compound. But the empty bunks, the warehouses, the sheer size of the operation told him one thing loud and clear. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. The black train was still out there. The FBI moved quickly to lock down the site, fencing off the compound with floodlights and round-the-clock guards. Trucks rolled in and out, hauling evidence, crates, documents, electronics, and anything that might point to the masterminds behind it all. But Sawyer noticed something strange as he walked the perimeter with Bandit that evening. They hadn't found a single ledger. No manifest, no digital trail. Whoever ran the place had stripped it bare. It was as if they'd known the raid was coming. Bandit sniffed near the back fence, nose pressed to the dirt, tail stiff. He barked once, sharp and certain. Sawyer followed, flashlight beam cutting through the weeds. There, half buried in the soil, was a torn piece of fabric. A child's t-shirt, too small for any of the kids they had rescued. Sawyer's gut twisted. There were more. Back at the station, the safe house buzzed with social workers and trauma specialists. Emily, the little girl who'd first warned him about the Friday train, sat at a table coloring quietly. Sawyer knelt beside her. You were right, he said softly. We found the place with the towers. She didn't look up, just kept coloring. Bandit lay down next to her, his head resting on his paws. After a few minutes, she whispered, but that wasn't the last one. Sawyer's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Emily finally glanced at him. Her eyes were haunted, too old for her age. There's another, bigger. They said, the train never stops until the end. Sawyer froze. The end of what? But Emily turned back to her crayons, shutting herself off. 3 days later, Sawyer was back in the woods, this time with a joint task force. They combed the line south of Redwood Yard, looking for signs of movement. The further they went, the more the forest gave way to rocky terrain in old mining country. That's where they found it. Hidden deep in a canyon, nearly invisible from the air, was another set of tracks, newly repaired. A tunnel mouth yawned at the end of the canyon, steel reinforced, graffiti scrubbed away. Fresh oil stains marked the gravel, proof that engines had come through recently. Sawyer crouched, brushing his hand over the steel rail. Still warm. Bandit barked, his hackles rising. The black train had been here. That night, the task force set up surveillance outside the canyon. Drones circled overhead, their infrared cameras scanning for movement. Sawyer and Bandit sat in a concealed position on the ridge, binoculars trained on the tunnel. Hours passed, nothing. Just the wind whistling through the pines and the distant call of an owl. Bandit lay at his side, head on his paws, but his ears twitched constantly, tuned to every sound. Then just after midnight, the ground began to tremble. Sawyer's binoculars caught it first, the faint glow of headlights inside the tunnel. Then came the rumble, low and steady, growing louder by the second. The black locomotive rolled into view, hauling 3 sealed cars behind it. Matte paint, no markings, windows blacked out. It stopped briefly at the mouth of the tunnel, engines idling. Figures moved along the cars, men with flashlights, checking locks, speaking into radios. And then, faint but unmistakable, a sound drifted on the night air. A child crying. Sawyer's blood turned cold. He whispered into his mic, "We've got eyes on the train. Kids inside." Repeat, "Kids inside." The sheriff's voice came back tense. "Do not engage. We need authorization from the feds." Sawyer clenched his jaw. Every second felt like an hour. He looked at Bandit, who was already on his feet, body rigid, staring at the cars. The dog knew. The order came minutes later. "Stand down. We don't have the manpower for a clean intercept. We'll track it and move later." Sawyer nearly ripped the earpiece out. Stand down? While kids were locked inside those steel coffins? He gritted his teeth, fists clenching. He'd obey for now. But deep down, he knew, the moment the train moved, those kids would vanish into the system again, swallowed whole. And there was no guarantee they'd ever come out. The next day, Sawyer filed his report, but the words felt hollow. Observed train, multiple suspects, children hurt inside. No engagement. No engagement. The phrase made him sick. Sheriff Huxley slammed his office door and tossed a stack of papers onto his desk. Orders came from D.C. They're calling it too risky. Sawyer stood, fury in his voice. Too risky? They were right there. We could have stopped it. And gotten half of them killed, Huxley shot back. You think I like this? I don't. But the suits don't care about gut instinct. They care about optics. Sawyer didn't answer. He didn't need to, because Bandit had already made up his mind. The dog barked once, sharp, like a gunshot. His eyes locked on Sawyer, burning with a message his handler understood perfectly. We're not done. That evening, Sawyer drove out to the canyon alone. No backup, no drones, no chain of command, breathing down his neck, just him and Bandit. They parked a mile out and hiked in under cover of darkness. The air was crisp, the stars sharp above the treetops. Every sound carried in the canyon, from the crunch of gravel under his boots to the quiet huff of Bandit's breath. At the tunnel entrance, Sawyer stopped. Fresh tracks scored the dirt. Oil stains glistened. And there, near the edge of the rail, something caught the beam of his flashlight. A shoe. Small, pink, worn down at the heel. Sawyer picked it up, his throat tight. Bandit whined softly, pawing at the ground. Sawyer slipped the shoe into his pocket. We're going to find them, he whispered. I promise. The next morning, Agent Vance called an emergency briefing. His face was pale, his voice clipped. The black train was sighted again, this time 100 miles east. Locals reported strange noises near an abandoned depot. By the time our team got there, it was gone. He glanced around the room, then fixed his eyes on Sawyer. They're moving faster now, which means we're running out of time. Sawyer's fists clenched under the table. He didn't say it out loud, but he didn't need to. The truth was written all over his face. Bandit had led them this far, and he wasn't about to stop barking until they reached the end of the line. That night, Sawyer sat alone with Bandit, staring out over the dark forest. His coffee had gone cold, untouched. He thought about the 15 children they'd rescued, the 6 more from the compound, and the countless others still trapped on that train. He thought about Emily's words. The train never stops until the end. The end wasn't just a place, it was a deadline. And it was coming fast. Sawyer placed a hand on Bandit's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "We'll find them," he whispered, "no matter what it takes." Bandit's tail thumped once, slow and certain. Somewhere in the night, a distant horn blew, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet Oregon hills. The black train was still running, and it was daring them to follow. The black train haunted Sawyer's every waking thought. He could still hear the rumble of its wheels, feel the tremor under his boots when it roared through the canyon. Every report from nearby towns made his pulse spike. Strange horns at night, tracks lit by flood lamps, children's cries overheard in the dark. Each time, by the time anyone got close, the train was gone. But he knew one thing now: the train had a destination. It wasn't drifting aimlessly across forgotten tracks. It was moving towards something. And Sawyer was determined to meet it there. 3 nights later, a tip came through from an unlikely source. A retired conductor named Harold Jensen walked into the sheriff's office with a story. He'd worked the lines for 40 years, knew every mile of track in the county. "I was out by Millstone Bridge last night," Harold said, voice trembling. "Heard an engine, but that line's been dead for decades. Went to check this morning. Tracks were polished clean. Only happens when something heavy rolls through." Sawyer leaned forward. "Where does that line go?" Harold rubbed his chin. "Old switching yard near the state border. Government shut it down back in the 80s. Folks used to call it Devil's Crossing on account of how many accidents happened there. Ain't no reason for trains to run it, unless somebody brought it back." The room went quiet. Sheriff Huxley finally broke the silence. "That's your end of the line." Sawyer glanced down at Bandit. The shepherd's ears were up, eyes fixed on him like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. The task force moved out at dusk. This time, Sawyer wasn't going to be told to stand down. This was it, the end game. Devil's Crossing lay tucked in a valley of craggy hills, forgotten by time. Rusted signals leaned at odd angles, weeds splitting the concrete. But as Sawyer and Bandit crept closer, he saw it. Floodlights, bright, industrial, running off portable generators. And beyond them, the silhouette of a massive train yard, alive with movement. Figures patrolled the perimeter. Trucks idled. And in the middle of it all, the black train sat waiting, its cars sealed shut, engines rumbling like a beast impatient to be fed. Through binoculars, Sawyer saw it clear as day. Children's faces pressed against the blackened windows. Pale, silent, eyes wide. His blood turned cold. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where it ends." The assault team fanned out around the valley rim. Marksmen took positions. Agents whispered into radios. But down in the brush, Sawyer crouched with Bandit, his heart hammering. "Once we go, there's no going back," he told his partner. Bandit didn't move, didn't blink. His entire body quivered with readiness. Then, without waiting for the official signal, Sawyer whispered, "Go." Bandit leapt from the brush like a bullet, charging straight for the nearest guard. The man barely had time to turn before 100 pounds of muscle and teeth slammed into him, knocking him flat. Shouts erupted, floodlights swung, alarms blared, and the raid began. Chaos exploded in the yard. Gunfire rattled the air. Agents surged through the gates, shouting commands. Sawyer sprinted through the chaos, Bandit weaving ahead, ducking between crates and steel beams. He reached the first car and yanked at the door. Locked, sealed with heavy chains. Bandit barked furiously, pawing at the steel as if to say, "Hurry, they're in here." Sawyer lifted his radio. "Bolt cutters, north side, now!" 2 deputies rushed over, snapping through the chains. The door groaned, then slid open. Inside, dozens of children huddled in the dark. The beam of Sawyer's flashlight cut across their faces. Tired, scared, but alive. "It's okay," Sawyer shouted. "We're police. You're safe now." Bandit jumped inside first, tail wagging furiously as the children cried and reached for him. Their small hands clutched at his fur, clinging to the first living thing they trusted in months. Sawyer's throat tightened. He swallowed hard and called for medics. But it wasn't over. At the far end of the yard, the locomotive roared louder, smoke billowing from its stack. A figure climbed into the cab, someone trying to move the entire train with kids still inside. Sawyer's blood iced. "They're going to run." He bolted forward, Bandit right at his side. Gunfire sparked around them as guards tried to cover the escape. Sawyer ducked behind a crate, fired back, then sprinted again. The locomotive's wheels shrieked as it began to lurch forward. Sawyer grabbed the side ladder and hauled himself up, heart pounding. Bandit barked furiously below. Sawyer waved him off. "Stay, boy." But Bandit refused. With a running leap, the shepherd scrambled up behind him, claws scrabbling against steel until he made it onto the platform. Sawyer barely had time to react before a shadow loomed in the cab. A man twice his size swung a crowbar at his head. Sawyer ducked, the blow sparking against the metal wall. He drove his shoulder into the man, fists flying in a desperate struggle. The train gained speed, grinding over the rails. Bandit launched himself at the attacker, teeth clamping onto the man's arm. The crowbar clattered to the floor. With a howl of pain, the man stumbled backward, losing his footing. Sawyer shoved hard, sending him tumbling out of the cab onto the gravel below. Breath ragged, Sawyer grabbed the controls. He yanked hard, pulling the brake lever with every ounce of strength he had. The wheels screamed, sparks showering into the night. The black train shuddered, then screeched to a halt just yards before the yard's far gate. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of steam. Sawyer slumped against the wall, chest heaving. Bandit pressed against his leg, eyes locked on him, steady and calm. They'd done it. By dawn, the yard was secured. Dozens of children had been pulled from the black cars, rescued at last. Medics tended to them, wrapping them in blankets, handing them water, whispering words of comfort. The sun rose slowly over the valley, casting golden light across the scene. Sheriff Huxley clapped Sawyer on the shoulder. "You and that dog just shut down the biggest trafficking line this state's ever seen." Sawyer looked down at Bandit, who sat proudly among the rescued children, letting them hug him, bury their faces in his fur. "He's the real hero," Sawyer said softly. Bandit's tail thumped once, steady and sure. Later that week, the town of Elk Haven gathered in the square. The rescued children had been placed in care, families were arriving from across the country, and the story had spread far beyond their small corner of Oregon. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Sawyer stood off to the side, hand resting on Bandit's vest. He wasn't there for recognition. He was there to see the kids laugh again, to hear them sing and play like kids should. Emily spotted him across the crowd and ran over, her small arms wrapping tight around Bandit's neck. "You found us," she whispered. Sawyer blinked back tears. "No, Emily, he found you." Bandit licked her cheek, and for the first time since it all began, Sawyer let himself smile. The black train was gone, the tracks were silent, and the children were free. Thank you for following this story to the very end. Sawyer and Bandit's fight reminds us that heroes come in all shapes and sometimes with 4 paws. What would you have done if you were the officer hearing Bandit bark that first day at the abandoned train?